Welcome, everybody, to The Underneath. I'm your host, Cale Zeldin, and I'm really excited today to have a fellow English teacher on to talk old books and his story and what he's seeing in the classroom. He is a teacher. His name is Matt Ryan. Mr. Ryan, welcome to The Underneath. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here, Cale.
I'm excited. So I don't know what it's like up in Attleboro, but down here in Portsmouth, I woke up this morning, the weather's in the 60s, leaves are kind of blowing all around, and man, I am just getting jazzed for the new school year. Are you being greeted with similar weather up there?
Absolutely, and it's this time of year where that itch is there to get back into it. And I know everybody likes to talk about how quickly the summer goes by, and that's true, but when we're getting back to a job that we love to do, it's this time of year is exciting. It's like waiting for Christmas.
Yeah, I could feel it. We can joke about January 1st is the new year, or the Lunar New Year, but for me, the new year is Labor Day. Like, I am super excited, and of course, we live and teach up here in New England, and so we actually get to have Labor Day, then school, or at least most of us. So I'm really excited for it. But look, I know you from X, as sort of many of my guests are, and you're a guy who has embedded in your X handle Canon Chat. And I was just wondering, and based upon my experience of your posts and whatnot, that you are a fellow lover of old books. How did you become Mr. Ryan?
That's a good question. So as a child, I always loved to read, but I never envisioned myself being a teacher. There was no one in my family that was a teacher. I enjoyed school, but for some reason, I don't know, I never thought of it as something that I would do. I actually started off college as a biology major, really just for the only reason that I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. I loved animals, and that seemed to be a really cool career choice. Quickly found that was not what I wanted to do. So I was kind of left with, okay, what do I do now? I always loved reading. So I said, okay, I'll be an English major. And then, okay, what do you do with an English major? You write or you teach. And in my mind, that's what it was. I was an undergrad. You either write or you teach. And so I said, okay, I guess I'll try student teaching. And it wasn't until the very first day of student teaching that I realized this is what I want to do. It was amazing. In fact, my very first class went terribly because it was my first time in front of a group of high school kids staring at me like, who is this guy? But after doing it again, I said, this is amazing and I want to do this. And that was the beginning, I guess, of Mr. Ryan.
So, it's funny, when back in, when I was in college back in the 90s, this was still a time in which, we had the luxury of parents, at least I had the luxury of parents basically say, look, go to college and study what you want. And so I did, kind of like you. I took 2 books and I was intrigued that they sort of were portals into whole worlds that, of course, originally it was like sci-fi and fantasy, that I read as a younger man, but I started being introduced to these older books, and even though they didn't necessarily pass my initial sniff test in terms of just what you like, where are the swords, where are the ladies, where are the dragons, these older books, these ones that you and I would consider without blushing sort of part of the canon, had such depth and richness to it, even with just a little bit of help and a little bit of poking and prodding. Did you have a similar experience? And what was the old book that grabbed you?
I actually had a similar experience through my high school English classes. And I think I had amazing English teachers who exposed us to a lot of books, classic books as well as contemporary books.
Right.
And they were just really great at guiding me through these books, which I think is probably the primary job of the English teacher, right? I think of Flannery O'Connor talks about how it is the job of the English teacher to guide high school students through the reading of old books so that they may be able to eventually in time read today's books. And I was lucky enough to have teachers that did that, and they used good books to do that. As to what, I don't know. As a child, I read the Narnia books, and those were obviously great. But there was a book that I happened to be going through my parents' basement, and there was a box of books in there, and I opened it up, and there was a book called Death Be Not Proud by John Gunther. And the title struck me at the time. I didn't understand the allusion, but I
catch
said,
the reference, right?
Yeah,
right.
But I'm like, that's a great title. And I opened it up and I started reading it, and I think I read it all in the afternoon. And I think it's the first time I remember crying at the end of the book. So for people that aren't familiar with it, it's a memoir where John Gunther writes about his high school age son who has a brain tumor, and it basically talks about the last years of his life. And it was the first time I felt I was so moved by his story. I said, wow, this is amazing. This is something.
There's something here, right? For me, and it's funny, I was just thinking about this over the weekend, why I gravitate toward what I gravitate toward and why I love old books. And I really have spent a lifetime basically being a cheerleader, for old books. And I distinctly remember in 8th grade, 2 books kind of stuck out to me. We had to read The Hobbit, and I did, and I loved it like right away. I just, I took to it, and I certainly didn't sit in one, I didn't read the whole thing in one sitting, but I just remember just loving the characters, loving Bilbo and the cleverness of it all. And anyway, that really struck me. But we read Call of the Wild by Jack London at some point, and I read it, and then that was it's a pretty short book, and I just remember being so moved by it and being brought to tears. And I'm a boy, I go to an all boys school. I'm not a particularly teary guy. Or I certainly wasn't a particularly teary kid. I think I've become much more teary as an adult, especially to be moved. But I just remember two feelings. Number one, what a miracle this thing is. And again, I probably didn't have those words for it then, but in retrospect, I was moved by the miraculous power of it. And secondly, so sad that it was over. Just this profound sadness that, that it's gone. Like, and again, you can reread it, of course, and there's I feel like I could do a whole podcast series on the joys of rereading, but that was sort of this revelation that reading was like somehow just profoundly worth it.
It's interesting that we both kind of turn back to emotional responses to a book, right? But I think that's right. Actually, that was a book. I can remember vividly that cover.
Yes, I had an old Bantam Classic.
Yes, I have the same one. It's like a yellow border around it. I think I still have it. So.
Oh, that's good. I lost mine, but that's so good. Certain artifacts, it's funny that like artifacts, like real things, still like. So if I see a picture of it, on the internet, I'm immediately transported. Just through that cover, because you stare at the cover. You look at. I maintain that cover art on a great book is underappreciated. That in order for it to grab you.
I just gave my youngest son my box set of the Narnia books.
Oh, fantastic!
That would have been published in the 80s, and so I just opening them and looking at these covers, just all that that rushed back immediately.
It's a transport, isn't it? I like to think of literature as a kind of an experience machine, but I think we underestimate the power of the physicality of the thing, which is something I kind of want to get into in a little bit. But okay, so you became Mr. Ryan, kind of like the way that I became Mr. Zeldin. I have done a number of different things. I taught for a couple of years and caught the bug, but wasn't quite convinced that I was going to do this for the rest of my life. And so I did other things, and then I kind of myself kind of get pulled back into things. So what is your career been in terms of being Mr. Ryan? What kind of places have you taught?
Sounds like we have a very similar background as well. So I started at a public suburban high school in Massachusetts. I also left. So I taught for about 5 or 6 years. I had an opportunity to work at a private manufacturing engineering job that gave me some ability to travel. Admittedly, an increase in salary that was really appealing to me.
That's real. That's real.
Yeah. And I lasted, excuse me, I lasted for 5 years, which was probably about 4.5 years too long.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I knew that I missed it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so I came back to teaching. I taught in an all boys urban Catholic school north of Boston.
Yep.
I really liked the experience, but the commute was a killer. I was in the car almost 3 hours a day.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah. So I luckily was able to find a co-ed Catholic school in my hometown. I've been here. This is my 13th year. I can't imagine going anywhere else. It feels like home to me, and I love it. And I talk to the students all the time about, because I always ask them, what do they want to do in their future? And a lot of it, understandably, their teenagers is wrapped around a nice salary, a comfortable salary. But I try to explain to them, like, when that alarm goes off in the morning and you wake up, if you dread going to work, it doesn't matter how much you're making. You only get one go around at this. And for me, teaching was the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning and gets me excited to go to work. So
I have the same 5-year hiatus. Although instead of working at a manufacturing company, I worked in Hollywood.
Oh, wow.
I was trying to do my own writing, but I was working at a production company, and my wife was teaching, and I kept being drawn back into discussions about curriculum and discussions about, teaching styles and all of that. And I realized that I cared a heck of a lot more about that sort of thing than I did about the work that I was doing on a day-to-day basis. And so similarly kind of found myself back and extremely happy to do that. And I've been doing it now consecutively here I just finished my 18th school year, starting my 19th in just a few short weeks here. So that's really great. Now, why old books though? I mean, why is that the magic? You talk about the Canon, you run a very real and successful sort of Twitter/X based group chat that I have not yet been able to indulge. I have had an incredibly busy summer. But why the Canon? Why old books? I mean, it seems so passé, so old fashioned, man.
Right. So out of date.
Yes.
I think maybe it's a little bit because of what we just modeled here. We were able to have a conversation. We were able to connect over common books, and that's kind of what a canon is. It's a collection of books that experts have determined to be the greatest. And if we all partake in reading them, it gives us a common unifying story that we're all a part of, and we can share this. So I was actually thinking that when you brought up Call of the Wild, because I was thinking, I read that Jack London book as a child myself. That's one of the things I worry about today. It feels like if we're moving away from the canon, there may be books that are valuable to teach, but they're not going to be. It's unlikely that a lot of readers and a lot of people are going to have them in common. So what's going to happen in the future?
Yeah, that commonality thing is so important. And I think for the audience, a comp might be those of us of a certain vintage might remember, that back in the day, even, I basically grew up with cable television, but back in the day, the network still really reigned supreme. And it was 3 and then it was 4. And if you were really stuck, you would throw on PBS. But I mean, for the most part, it was NBC, ABC, and CBS. And I just distinctly remember, you and millions of your fellow Americans would watch an episode of Seinfeld, and the next day you talked about Seinfeld. You could like Elaine better than George, or Jerry over Kramer, like whatever. But at the end of the day, or maybe you were a Newman fan. I don't know. But there was a real sense that there was this thing and all of us kind of plugged into this thing and enjoyed the thing, and then later on could share the thing.
Yeah.
And I worry, sort of twofold. I mean, those sort of cultural common denominators, I think, are just by sheer volume and diversity of choice, have robbed us of a sense of commonality. But how much more so that, for those of us who are immersed in the canon, as the two of us are, a lot of those stories that we grew up watching were in fact inspired by these very real things that, sure, there are copies of them in the local Barnes and Noble, there are copies of them for free in the local libraries, but a copy of a book sitting on a shelf somewhere, either for loan or for sale, is not the same thing as you and I having the copy of it in our imaginations.
Right.
And what is the risk? Maybe that's my question. I mean, what is the risk? Someone who cares about the canon as you do, what's the risk for us, for our young people, for us as a community, as a culture?
Yeah, so much if we don't give them these books, the chances of them picking them up and reading them are very unlikely. There's going to be some that do it, but it's just not very likely. And I still remember a grad school professor that I had, and she was my favorite professor. She was tough. I took her but I liked how tough she was. And at the beginning of the class, she was going around and she was asking us questions about the assignment that we were supposed to have read for the class, and she was essentially calling out students, grad students, by the way, who hadn't read.
It's like, bro, it's your job. You're a grad student. Like, come on. Yeah.
That's why I liked her. She was no nonsense. She was probably she was Eastern European and end of the older guard. And so after the second or third student that couldn't answer her very basic questions about the text, she said, if you're, and I'll remember this so clear, she's like, if you don't read this, who will? If you don't read this, who will?
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. Right. And I thought that's so right. So if we don't teach them, they're unlikely to read them. And then there's so much that is lost about ourselves, about our history, about our past, about humanity. I was listening a couple years ago to the Anchored podcast and it was an episode with Cornel West. And he said something. He said, he was asked a question about, what's the issue with replacing classic text with, modern selections. And he said, I think the line he said something like, why would you disarm yourself? And I love that. Why would you disarm yourself? And I thought that was so profound. And then by extension, because we're teachers, at least if we're disarming ourselves, we're doing that by choice. I don't agree with the choice, but we're doing it by choice. But if we're not even arming our students in the first place, like, how dare we? Like, it's such a, we're just not fulfilling our duties as teachers if we're just shirking and eliminating the best that's ever been written.
And I would imagine that Cornel West, they were not expecting that answer from Cornel West for kind of low resolution identity politics reasons, right? But if you've spent any time listening to Cornel West, the guy is deeply steeped in all the bad stuff, right? All the, the sort of the dead white European male thing.
He loves the Russian novelists.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're human, you can't help but love, the Russian novelist. Like, what do you think the beef is then? I mean, what's the energy behind, look, you and I both invoked the canon. You and I are both very in the trenches experience. We've both been to graduate schools. What motivates this animus against even the very idea that there's a canon? I mean, which is silly because, it's not like there are these 137 books that only count and nothing else counts. I mean, I get the sense from talking with you and watching you that you have a very expansive and generative vision of what the canon is. But what motivates these people, you think, our colleagues, essentially? Those, I think, that are tasked with holding on in some level. What do you think motivates this?
It's a good question. I have to wonder what their own educational experience looks like. like I mentioned earlier, I was blessed that had teachers that taught us these great works.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's probably I think it's probably primary a misunderstanding of what the canon is, and everybody just wants to write the canon as just collections of books written by dead white men that have no connection whatsoever to readers today. And I think
Mhm.
that's just such a narrow view
Mhm.
of the canon. That's actually one of the reasons why I started Canon Chat, because I
Mhm.
kind of wanted to model to. I'm sure most of the people that kind of follow Canon Chat are probably teachers themselves, and
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of show them, like, no, this idea that the canon is, first of all, it's not static, it's always
Right.
changing, it's
Right.
always moving, we're always reevaluating.
Right.
And
Especially the newer, the closer you get to the year of our Lord 2025, right? I
right.
mean, these are always in flux, and people, there are always books that are kind of vying for attention. And my favorite example of that is the one you're doing this summer, which is probably my all-time favorite novel, Moby Dick. And for our audience's sake, I'm not going to, but it was essentially ignored. I mean, it not only was it ignored after it came out, it was in 1851, I think it was. It was a book that essentially ruined Melville's
Mm-hmm.
career, and yet it reemerges I think it was in the 20s, the 1920s, that it kind of reemerges, and now it's, even for those who hate the idea of canon, people will begrudgingly admit that it might be, and there are a couple that vie for this, but it might
Sure.
be the great American novel.
That's a great example. I'm thinking also of, I think it was Alice Walker who helped to
Yeah,
rediscover Zora Neale Hurston,
yeah,
and
right. Yeah, I
um,
taught that too. Man.
yeah, there's a bunch of examples of this. So this idea that it's just this static thing that is like you're either in or you're out, and nothing ever
Mm-hmm.
changes is just false. And the other irony is, I feel like a lot of the books that teachers want to use today in place of canonical texts,
Mm-hmm.
the authors of those books read the canon themselves.
Deeply formed by them, right? I mean,
Right.
the great example of this, of course, is Toni Morrison. It's like, she's a wonderful writer in her own right, but she herself is steeped in Faulkner and Greek tragedy, and she and very bold and vociferously fighting to sort of be part of this conversation. And lo and behold, here she is, right? And it's very difficult to even go through one graduate school, at least it was in the late 90s, to go through one graduate school class and not read a Toni Morrison novel. So it's an interesting example of that. So you mentioned that you have questions about these folks who wish to sort of uh, decolonize the curriculum, these kinds of things, that you have questions about their own educational background. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. You give me an opportunity to clarify, because it
Yeah.
probably sounds a little bit more dismissive than I
No, no,
than I
no.
meant it to be.
Yeah.
I I was I was lucky to have gone through school. It seems like at the tail end
Mm.
of when we were still kind of doing like whole book reading and
Right.
canonical books, and there
Right.
seems to be a shift. And so I wonder if they're, just because they themselves weren't exposed to great books by great teachers in their high school classrooms,
Mm.
I can't help but think that that had to have a formative effect on who they
Or
became
or
as teachers and
or
readers.
if I could just add on to that, what if the teachers, let's say they were given, I don't know, Hamlet to read in class. What if the presentation of Hamlet was not just, hey, let's read Hamlet and here's some background information, but let's just wrestle with Hamlet. But instead, you get a very framed and colored view of Hamlet as an example of some kind of, bad stuff, patriarchal
Sure.
or capitalistic or oppressive or white or what have you. I can imagine if that's how Hamlet was presented to you. Yeah, like
Sure.
why are we reading this garbage, right?
No,
If it's anyway. Yeah. So what do you think?
no, I think you're right, and especially at that age where we're
Right.
so impressionable. And I look back at professors that I had in college that at the time I didn't recognize what they were doing, but they were certainly steering me to view the world and view literature through a certain lens. And because they're good at it and they're passionate at it, it was appealing. And then it was only kind of when I had a little bit of my own, maturity and experience that I kind of look back and said, "Oh, that's not, that's not the right way, or at least not my way. That's not my way."
Yeah, we're in agreement there. I am devoted to the idea that as much as possible, I need to let the book speak first. And so my role, you mentioned earlier, invoking Flannery O'Connor, this podcast is a great fan of Flannery O'Connor, as you might imagine. But the idea that the role of the teacher is to guide, that in fact, your role is not to say, hey, look at me, but rather, hey, let's look at this book together, in a kind of Virgil and Dante sort of way, and I get angry when I think that a teacher sort of oversteps this. I don't know, I feel it's almost like a contract that I have with the kids, but also I have a contract with the author, even though long dead, let's say, and a contract with the book and a contract of a responsibility and a duty to the book. Not that I'm trying to make the book in my own image, but rather, look, we're reading Paradise Lost. Like, let's let Milton teach us.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm happy to disagree with Milton in the final analysis, but before I'm too rash to do such a thing, maybe I should give it its due.
It's probably easier to tell them how to read these things because, number one, then they don't even have to read it, right? I think that's a big part of it, right? So, it's funny that maybe the thing that gets the most pushback of anything that I say on Twitter is that, and I say it pretty intentionally, is I say we have to make students read books. We have to force them. I use that word, force them to read the books, because I think it's really easy if they're not going to read the book, then they can just kind of sit back passively, listen to what the teacher is saying about the books. There's no dialogue, and then they have a test, and they just kind of spit back at the teacher what they want. They know they want the teacher to hear. So I really believe if the students in front of you are actually reading the book, they're going to push back. And we've all experienced this before. I know you've experienced it. They're always going to push back on any particular reading of a text that you and I might have, and that's a wonderful thing. That's where the learning starts.
Right, because it's something that they have now. And look, they could be wrong, of course. This is not, I'm certainly not one of these people who say, well, if the kid says it, then you sort of have to genuflect to it. No, of course not. But empowering them, say, okay, now you read these 20 pages, let's say, if that was the assignment for the night, and you think X. Great. I don't think X is right, but now let's talk about that. We have this thing in common. So I'm not like attacking you as a person. You're not attacking me as a person, but you now have this experience. And how good was this experience? How well rendered was your experience of it? Did you notice on page 17 this little side comment that it didn't seem all that important? Well, how does that little side comment then color your take X? And then all of a sudden, you see the student kind of puff up their chest a little bit and like, oh, all right. Like, I've got something to say. I might be totally wrong, but I've got something to say. So tell me this, Matt, how do you get the kids to read? How do you make them? Because again, totally agree with you. How do you make them read? What's your method here?
My method is a simple one, but it requires work. I give them nightly reading assignments, so a certain number of pages, depending on the complexity of the book. That will vary. And then the first thing that we do when they get back into class is I give them a reading quiz.
Music to my ears, Mr. Ryan. Right? You and I are quiz brothers. Absolutely. There's no other way.
And I can't, whenever I talk to people about this, and this is not hyperbole, I say this is the thing that changed my classroom drastically, because
I have a whole class that I give on the magic of the quiz. And I have all these. Oh, I love this. Yeah, please keep going. Keep going.
And they're specific details that you can't get by reading summary sites, but they're not completely obscure.
Right.
And the students
What's
whine.
the third word on page 10? Right.
The students whine and complain, but they read. And so they come. So to back up a little bit, I think the biggest barrier, first of all, is students have taught themselves that they don't like to read.
Right.
Because they've
internalized this algorithm, right? Totally.
Yep. And then they haven't had to read for the most part in their classes. And so this is just what they believe. And so once I show them that they have to read, and so for some of them, they're good right off the bat. Some of them, it takes a little bit of time. But once they start reading, they realize, whoa, I actually like this. And I can't tell you how many students, and these are the same students who will complain to me all year long about the reading questions that I ask them, which by the way, shows that they are reading, which is great, because if they weren't giving it back to me, they'll say, why didn't you ask this?
Oh, and it's my favorite. Yeah, at a certain point, like in October or November, I'll come into class and the same thing, like every class is a reading, every class is the quiz. It's the first thing every time. And I'll waltz into class and I'll be like, all right, what do you think is going to be on the quiz?
Yeah.
And I was like, all right. So then I'll go around there. I take out a sheet of paper. Give me because I do 6 questions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but I do.
About the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, all right, what are your 6? And then I use that class, and invariably everybody, when you source it as a group of kids, around the table, they invariably nail every one of the questions. Not one singular person, but they nail them. And I'm like, okay, guys, there it is. You're now a wizard.
Yeah. And so then they learn that they like to read, they can read, and I can't tell you. And you've probably heard the same thing. I've had so many students say to me at the end of a school year, "Thank you for reawakening my love of reading." Because a lot of them, I also have them write about themselves as readers, and nearly universally, they all talk about how much they loved reading when they were younger, elementary school age, and then something happens in those middle school years, which I get, and they kind of fall away, and then they talk about how great it is to rediscover their love of reading. So that's the primary method that I use. Is if they have to read. If they don't read, they're not going to do well in this class, and I think once in the last 13 years, I've had one student that just said, "I'm not going to read." I said, "Okay."
You're like,
"Yep."
It's a choice we make, right, Mr. Ryan? It's a choice we make.
But the other thing is, and I loved how you mentioned, on page 17. Remember, we have to read with them.
Yes.
My wife.
Oh, absolutely. And look, go ahead. What were you say about?
I was just going to say, my wife. Every year, I'm sitting down in the evening and I'm reading the book, and she's like, "Why are you reading that again?"
Oh my gosh, our wives should get together because I'm the exact same thing. I have to.
Because if they're reading closely,
I'm faster at it now. But I mean, how could you possibly remember the kind of details that we want our kids to remember? If it's been a year or 3 or 5 or 10, my goodness, what are we even doing here, right? And of course, for me, it's just such a generative process because I am seeing all kinds of things, So I don't know if you do this as a teacher, but I will. So I have a copy, and usually a copy is good for about 4 or 5 years. And first year I'll underline in red, and then the second year I'll underline in blue, and then in green, and then in black, and so I can kind of see my own thinking, how it evolves and changes and is influenced over the years. So I think it's absolutely essential. If you're going to be an English teacher, you have to read with the kids, and that has to be part of the contract, right? Look, it was a long reading last night. Guess who woke up early this morning to finish it? Yours truly.
There's been the occasional, we won't tell my students, but I can count on one hand where something has come up and I just haven't been able to do the reading. And I feel like because these students are reading and they're smart, I feel so exposed.
Oh, yes.
And it's a horrible feeling. And that's also, conversely, that's probably what the student is feeling when they don't read too.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And so
and it's a terrible feeling, and nobody wants to feel that, right? And so you're setting up certain incentive structures that, and it seems to me that what it activates with most of my kids is that it activates that sense of almost puzzle hunting. or pattern recognition, which is really one of the major things I'm trying to teach them through literature. But that it's almost like there's a contest. And so for my competitive kids, they're like, they do not want to miss one of those questions.
Mm-hmm.
They want to see, so I have found that then can, I don't know, be contagious maybe a little bit for some of those kids who might be a little bit more reticent.
And it's funny, I think the criticism for using the quizzes is that the motivation to read isn't intrinsic, right? It's an extrinsic, and I would love for students to intrinsically have that motivation. They love to read for the sake of reading. They're teenagers. It's, that's unlikely to happen. I'd rather them read using the motivation.
An external motivation, because in my experience, and look, I also coach, and so for me, coaching, it's the same analogy, right? Like, I wish kids naturally wanted to. I know you're a big hockey guy. I'm not a hockey. I mean, I'm a fan, but I'm not a hockey coach. It's like, I want the kids to have better stick skills. I want them to want to have better stick skills. Well, guess what you have to do to have better stick skills? You have to live with the damn thing, right? You have to constantly be playing with it, or lacrosse, or whatever it is, right? I'm a golf guy, right? So it's like, I want kids to be dreaming of pitching with their 50-degree wedge on the side of the green, all week long, right? But we know that left to their own devices, I mean, kids probably just want to scroll. I get it. I get it, right? But so therefore we have to give them certain external motivations, because I think for many of the students, something will click. Like they realize, oh wait, it's no longer this onerous burden so much as it is, I want to beat the quiz.
Right. And even if they don't like the book, a lot of them will see the value of reading it. The book that comes to mind immediately for me is The Scarlet Letter. And I tell them every year, this will probably be the most complex text you're going to read. And I tell them very upfront. I said that's even part of the reason why I'm teaching this book. I'm not letting it go. And most of them generally don't enjoy it, but a lot of them say, I didn't like reading it, but I'm really glad to have read it. And I said, wow, that's music to my ears. That is.
It's almost better. It's almost better than like a fanboy for Scarlet Letter, right? I mean, I want you to be a fanboy because I love it, but there are certain things that you can only really appreciate as an adult, right? And I think it's okay to say that stuff out loud. It's like a complex meal at a fancy French restaurant. I could bring a 10-year-old to that who's accustomed to eating chicken tenders and fries, and it's a total waste of, it's a waste of this beautiful meal. And but you also know that you have to start somewhere. You have to build them into complexity. And so frog marching them through the Scarlet Letter is a good thing, right? Whether or not they're going to sort of pick it up and, I remember the days when I was reading, about Dimmesdale or Hester, but that forced experience of complexity is actually, I think, the experience of growth, of breadth and depth that I want to say is essential to the growth of the human person.
Right. And then all the cultural capital that goes along with like the Scarlet Letter too, right? That's even an added benefit. I wouldn't even say that's not on the list of reasons why I teach it, but that's just an extra byproduct of teaching great books like that. I love the analogy that you use. I use virtually the same analogy when it comes to explaining. For me, I always explain to them the difference between taste and judgment.
Okay, good. Break it down for me.
For me, that's so essential, and so it makes sense. So I tell them it makes sense that The Scarlet Letter may not be a book that you particularly enjoy because that is your taste. And we talk about all the things that go into forming our tastes. And everyone is, you're welcome to your own taste. But when we talk about judgment, that's a completely different skill, right? And so it seems a little pedantic, and my students It's funny. I ran into a couple of students. Yeah, I ran into a couple of students yesterday at the hockey rink, and we were talking about books that they were reading. And one of the students said, "Oh, it's a terrible book." And these were both students of mine. And the other student said to her, she corrected her because it's the thing that I always force them to say. She goes, "No, it's not a terrible book. You didn't like it."
Yeah.
And for me, it seems a little pedantic, but I think it's important. So for them to distinguish between the two, between the difference between taste and judgment.
Right. I mean, even just that as a framework, I mean, as one goes about one's life, just to recognize that, that sucks versus it's not my cup of tea, but I can appreciate it. I mean, just that alone is worth everything, it seems to me.
That's the Great Gatsby for me, which is probably shocking to a lot of English teachers. So
I'm with you on this one.
Okay.
So my unpopular take, which sounds like yours too, is that people think The Great Gatsby is great because of the last 15 pages. The last 15 pages are brilliant. It hits that tone that is the most difficult of all tones to hit, which is like bittersweet. It hits it all. It's sad, and it's moving, and it's profound. But honestly, to get there, I just don't think it's a great novel. But fine, we're going to let it go. But I do think it's important to teach, right? Like it's a perfect example. Got to teach that one, But yeah, it's not as good as other things. I don't know. Any other books like that for you?
Probably, and it might just be a part of the fact that so The Great Gatsby and The Crucible are two texts that I've literally taught every single year of teaching. And so that probably has something to do with the fact that I'm kind of over them, because I remember liking Gatsby a lot more initially. So those are the two that kind of come to mind. But I don't think it's just simply rereading them, because there are other books that I've, if they're great books, right? There are other books that I've read time and time again and taught again and again that I love more.
Exactly. Like, so for me, Paradise Lost is such a hard read, and every year I read it, no book makes me feel more like a pretender than Paradise Lost, but no book has yielded more insight into language and the human nature than Paradise Lost in my years. And I've taught it every year for the last 18 years. And still this day, like I know every February I read with my kids Paradise Lost, and I'm gonna like buckle up, I'm gonna gird myself, and I'm gonna be worried, like that little panic flutter kicks in, like, do I even know what's going on here at all? And then it starts to do its thing, and then a couple of my kids that I never would expect in a million years are like, "This book's great." Like, wait, you don't even like to read. All of a sudden, Paradise Lost is like your thing. Like, it's a weird thing, but but that's the trust, right? And maybe part of the definition of the classic, it's almost like the Lindy effect. It's like classics are those things that can stand up to repeated experiences of it.
Right. You mentioned Toni Morrison earlier. When I teach Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. We read her introductory essay to the edition, which
very
is
challenging.
Yeah, because it's even if most of them haven't read Tom Sawyer, I used to be able to count on more of them having read Tom Sawyer, but not anymore. But most of them somehow know, or at least know, Huck Finn. Maybe it's from just a bad movie or something else. But a lot of them seem to have gotten this message that like Mark Twain himself is racist, or it's a racist book, and it's
amazing. I know.
And so then that's part of the reason why I invoke Toni Morrison, to show them how just wrong that take is. And then when we get to the end of the book, they realize, this is that's the furthest thing from the truth. When Huck says, "All right, I'll go to hell for Jim."
For Jim. That book has been put through the ringer, especially in the last 5 years, as we all know. It's a real shame. Just out of curiosity, I don't want to make this podcast about COVID and policies and all that sort of stuff. I have my opinions, and people can go on X and look at them. But just from a teaching perspective, not only just from a content, I think we're sort of hinting at content questions. That was, a lot of the rush with the BLM movement to sort of decolonize the classroom. I want to put that on the back burner right now and talk a little bit about what you see in students and how they were affected, especially as an English teacher, how they have been affected, and what are you seeing? Like what's in the offing? What's on the horizon here? Especially for those of us who are committed and dedicated to kids reading and the canon.
I think there's a correlation between COVID and the increasing addiction to our devices, our phones. And it's interesting. You would think, looking back, you would think, given all this extra time that we were gifted because of, well, that sounds horrible to say.
No, but I track, man.
You would think, oh, we would have filled that with more reading. And surprisingly, and I'm sure there's a psychological explanation for why this happened, but I'm finding that my students read less.
Dopamine hits, right? I mean, I remember when we came back that first fall and we were all masked up and spaced out and all that stuff, TikTok came up. Mm-hmm. And at the time it was still pretty new. Reels had been in existence. And one of the kids turns to her fellow student in the room and said, well, at least I didn't spend, 8 hours a day on TikTok. And I perked up. I was like, wait, what? And I thought it was just like hyperbole. And you could see the kid, they were masked, but you could still kind of see them flush and you could see their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a denial. And so I say, wait, hold the phone.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry. Bad pun. Hold the phone. Are you serious? And he kind of went like this. And then the girl that had called him out, I mean, like, Mr. Zeldin, I mean, I'm not that much better. I was doing 6 and 7 hours a day. And on TikTok.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, this is something, right? So I agree. I think that and of course the dopamine hit of something new every 30 seconds, every 60 seconds, right? I think we understand that from a psychological perspective.
If I could just bridge off that,
please.
What you were saying is, I always find it kind of stunning how self-aware they are.
Yes,
they
know,
and they know it's not good for them, and they want to not participate in it as much, but yet they don't know how to break away from it.
Right. But yet they don't quite. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, that was like a biggest change, and just seeing seeing the phones out, like they need it.
Yeah.
Like, so this is a new policy this year. We're going the way that many schools are, where like phone has to be away all day, out of sight. Good. We don't see
That's
it. Previously, it was students can have it out between classes and lunch. Right. They shouldn't have it out in the classroom. But after COVID, I had to every day. I had to ask them to put their phones away. Yeah. Whereas before then, if they wanted to use the phone, they actually, Mr. Ryan, do you mind if I quickly just check my phone? I need to text my mom. Sure, no problem. Yeah. So I think that was primarily the biggest change. And so, yeah, instant gratification, short little videos. I saw a stat somewhere, like the average length of a video that a person watches on YouTube is something like 8 seconds.
Wow.
And so I'm sure you're seeing it too. Like a big barrier to reading is stamina.
Yeah.
Just having the ability to sit there and do it.
Right. Like keeping a kind of open portal focused on one basic thing, which with complex sentence structures over the span of 10 minutes, let's say, let's be nice about this. Like that takes something. Right. Yeah. And it's hard to do. And of course, human nature being what it is, we gravitate toward those things that are easier. So it's not a surprise. And, I'm sure both of us would cop to the fact that my own attention span has, I picked up a copy of The Ambassadors the other day, a book that I had read, Henry James, that I'd read in college. And I struggled with it in college, and I picked it up and I was like, how did I ever understand Henry? Now, Henry James, of course, is famous for his clauses and the length of his sentences and all of that. So it's a particularly extreme example. But, Dickens, it's hard to read now in a way that I didn't feel it was particularly hard to read 10 years ago. But now I think it's hard to read, but it's worth it, right? And so we do, I know you're teaching Christmas Carol this coming year. I think you'll really enjoy it. If you haven't taught it yet, it's worth that time and attention. But it's a little bit of a okay, I'm going to do this thing, And so I think the attention spans with COVID have COVID accelerated a trend of attention span destruction. Maybe that's a way to do it. Can I ask you a question, that is not necessarily strictly about reading, but it's certainly something that pertains to teaching. How have you been considering Chat, GPT, and Grok and Claude and all these things, especially as it pertains, I guess, both to reading summaries rather than the books, but essay generation? How are you looking at all this?
Yes, I think I'm probably doing what a lot of teachers are doing, is that primarily the writing is being done in class, paper to pen, paper to pencil to paper, pen to paper, because the temptation to use it outside of the class is too great. I think that's fine. And I think actually, I find that a lot of their best writing they do on the spot. I have different hypotheses and theories about that. I think if they're doing it on a laptop or an iPad, they're editing as they're writing, and they're just not good enough to do that yet, where they are less likely to do that writing it by hand. So that's kind of I don't know, that's just like the initial response. I'm not entirely satisfied with that, because I think there is something to be said.
I know. Really, over the span of 4 or 5 days, wrestling with a paragraph and an idea. Yeah, I know. Yep. This is, I do think that we English teachers can overly fetishize the writing process. I'm just going to that's a general statement. But man, there really is something to writing a 3-page paper over the course of a couple of days, focused on it, walking away from it, coming back to it. The way your mind stacks things and reorders things when you're not paying attention. It's I worry about that.
Yeah. And I suppose you could argue you could do that over the course of a number of classroom sessions as well.
But right. So my concern is not just the summaries, not just the, hey, Grok, write me a 3-page paper on Ahab and monomania or something like that, right? Which it can do right now. I could, and it's spits something out, and it's not bad, right? It's not them, but it's not bad. But it's the idea generation, right? To me, that's the most frightening part of the artificial intelligence push, is that I don't have to wrestle an insight. I can just go find one.
Right. That's the scary part. It's easy. I think it's safer for you and I to use it because we've done all that.
Yeah.
All that work, right?
Right. Yeah. And I do want to add that caveat to the audience here. For me, I'll go on Grok and ask him a couple of questions and some follow-up questions. It's the only one I use. It's just because it's attached to X, and it's it can be a lot of fun. Actually,
sure.
If I'm being real honest, it's oh, I hadn't thought about that. And then this weird thing will happen, oh, Kale, you asked this question 3 days ago about Aristotle. If you're interested in how Aristotle, what he would say about monomania, and then it'll spit me. And I'm oh, that's actually pretty cool, right? And so that can be a kind of fun thing, but my misgivings. Well, tell me, what are your misgivings about this then?
Well, yeah, they don't have to do the work, right? They don't have to do the work. They don't have to
explain. What do you mean? What does that do?
Develop a cogent, arguable claim about a text that we're reading. If they just pop that into Grok or whatever, AI bot, it's just going to spit it back at them. And then from there, they can ask for evidence. So they don't really have to go searching for that as well. It's interesting. So that was, so another thing is that you and I are probably able, because we have some knowledge in the areas that we're discussing with the bots, is we can quickly identify flaws.
That's bullshit. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And so actually and I do that all the time. And then the grok will apologize or whatever. But I had one student who wrote an essay for me on A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I'm reading her essay, and then I get to a quote, and instinctively I said, that does not sound like Betty Smith. And I said, okay. I keep going. I get to the next one. I'm like, that isn't
not.
Yeah. And so sure enough, I looked and it wasn't, but I know exactly what happened. Of course, the student said, find me some quotes from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn that I can use. And she put them back in there thinking they were from the book, and they weren't.
Right.
And so we had a conversation about that. And she's like, well, isn't that the same as using a search engine? I said, no, not really. Not
really. Right.
So yeah, it's a challenging time. It's a challenging time.
So I wonder if this is forcing us to re-examine, the why. And one of the reasons why I enjoy your stuff on X, Matt, and just this conversation's great, is that, I think you and I are pretty firm in terms of, like, we know our why. For me, it's inextricable to my sense of worth as a human person, as a human being. And the dignity that is conferred upon me by virtue of being made in the image and likeness of God, right? And so therefore, not only does that afford me certain powers, but it also affords me a whole load of responsibilities. And for me, reading opens up those parts of me. If I'm not a hacker bro or a biohacker or a life hacker, but if to use that kind of language, I know that I can up my agency, to use that kind of lingo, that I can build myself out into a better person, a more, in all the different ways that we can be better. I'm convinced of that. I worry that my students don't even know really that that's what they're robbing themselves of.
So maybe the advantage that I have at teaching, not over you, but over other public school teachers, is teaching at a Catholic high school. We talk about those things all the time, right? We talk about, the principle, the Christian virtues, and, formation of character in a way that is, you probably just couldn't do, at least not honestly and truthfully, in a public school.
Just too much of a hot potato, you think? Or
yeah, I think so. Yeah. Any mention of faith whatsoever, I'm sure, is probably enough to turn some people off. So that's
similarly, I'm blessed that I can sort of be a full-throated teacher of what I know to be true in the context of the Catholic school that I teach at. It's the same thing. And I mean, for me, that's why I do it in the first place, because I get to do that. So what happens then if we have a generation of kids who don't read, haven't read, have no connection to the canon? What keeps you up at night or wakes you up early in the morning?
Yeah, we're probably already seeing that, right? And I try not to be too pessimistic or too dire, but I do think
I do appreciate, you're a pretty sanguine guy, so I definitely appreciate that.
I try.
I'm pushing back a little bit on that. What are your concerns?
My concerns are that the young teachers standing in front of students now themselves haven't been schooled in the great books, and they're going to in turn influence another generation, and then it just kind of spirals. I hope there's a pendulum swing back. It seems like there's starting to be a correction, but is it not enough? Is it a little too late? I don't know. I think all the people, like, I get so much less pushback on Twitter now, but I think a lot of it is because a lot of the people that would push back have left for blue skies. Well, I think it's true.
I think you're right. I think you're right, man. I think that's probably right.
And I kind of miss it.
Which is a shame. Which is a shame. Right, exactly.
Yeah,
it was our one nod toward a commons. You
right.
know, that yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if we got anywhere. I don't know the conversations were had. I don't know if minds were changed, but at least we were having these conversations and discussions. Now it just seems like so much of it is gone. Or if I keep it, I would say it seems like the only way to get like engagement on Twitter X is to say the most extreme thing. And then
that's the incentive structure for clicks and likes. That's for sure, and subs. But I'll say this: in every now and again, I keep my DMs open, and I'll get these. There are I remember looking this up, or I'm reminded of looking this up, that the amount of people with an X account who post is some small fraction of the amount of people who have an account on X.
Mm-hmm.
And same with YouTube, same with all the social media platforms. And so there are many more consumers of the scroll than those that will get into a back and forth, like what we did the other day. I don't even remember what the exact topic was, but
sure.
And I know, and they'll DM me, they'll say, Cale, you don't know me from Adam. And I'm like, that's true, I don't. But I really appreciate watching you try to conduct conversations online. And, and look, sometimes I can get a little spicy. I certainly don't bat 1,000. But I do genuinely try to conduct myself with an eye toward trying to understand some things. And, Cale on X is different than Cale around town, but only slightly so.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are a lot of people who, they might not say, yeah, we need to read the canon, and we're crazy if we don't teach the kids the canon. But I know that there are a ton of people who appreciate folks like you, folks like me, who stick up for reading Huck Finn or Moby Dick or Hamlet or Dante or Homer. I know that there are plenty of people out there. And so I do think that that's an important part. Maybe it keeps our follower count from going stratospheric. Like, fine. Right. For me, X is an opportunity that I can get these thoughts that haunt me. I can just get them out there. Some of them are good. Some of them are crap. It's okay.
Sure.
It's like just getting it out of my head and getting a reaction from it genuinely, as opposed to hopefully not just being super clickbaity.
Yeah. That's a pretty optimistic view. See?
Yeah, see, look at us. Look at us.
Right?
Yeah. Two guys who are not blackpilling today. This is fantastic. Well, so just maybe that's my last question. Do you think having the privilege to teach what you get to teach, where you get to teach, how you get to teach, do you think that helps you in fighting off the clouds?
Oh, without a doubt. It really does. And also I think it's important to I have an administration that supports what I do, that backs what I do completely. Last year, really for the first time, it's kind of interesting. I had some pushback on a couple of the books that I was teaching. And it was really empowering because I got this full-throated support from my administration that validated what I'm doing. And that was good. So I think and I probably take that for granted, because I think if I were in another situation, it would be harder. The job would be tougher. I think the job would be tougher, and I'd be going up against a lot more opposing forces. And if you don't have that support from administration, you're dead in the water.
It can be a very lonely place. During the sort of the zaniness in the early 2020s, people came after my head a couple of occasions, and my administration was great, and they were supportive. They said, tempered if you can, Cale, but I wasn't saying anything that was bad. I mean, it was, and I don't get on there and do the overt politics thing. Like I'm not like yay Trump or yay Biden or yay Harris. Like I don't do that. I certainly raise my eyebrows at things and make fun of our public officials, which I think is an important thing to do. I do my best to call balls and strikes. Obviously, I have a bias. That's fine. But in terms of my classroom, it just there's just no space or time for that. Exactly. We're talking about Macbeth. Yep. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about persuasion. That's what we're talking about. And some people can't quite wrap their minds around that I can, that we can actually teach the book, and I'm not like some secret MAGA head or, some secret, Team Blue guy. They can't quite conceive that could even be a thing. It's like, not only can it be a thing, but it has to be a thing.
I found that people seem to have such a broad definition of what politics is, because I've heard time and time again, like everything is political. And I just, we don't have time to go into that here, but I think that's bunk. And I kind of push back on that. But I think if that's your worldview, that everything is political, it makes sense that you couldn't envision a classroom in which the literature is treated as just a beautiful piece of, prose that is getting at the beauty and truth and goodness of humanity.
Well, right. And Matt, it's like the fact that, there's a church, 15 yards to my left here would suggest to you that not everything is political. In fact, there's this whole other thing we call metaphysics that we can, that we could actually anchor ourselves in a much more profound ways than electoral politics. My goodness. Like if that's all there is, maybe I should have some more compassion for those folks who will say, as you mentioned, everything is political. It's like, it's not, and I'm kind of sad for you.
Yeah. Hey, I know this is your podcast, but could I ask you a question?
Oh, I'm open book.
Perfect. Well, it's just one that's kind of been bouncing around my head during this conversation, and I'm not sure. I think I could argue both sides. Do you think it's more difficult to teach great works like Paradise Lost and The Scarlet Letter, and is it easier to teach the latest YA novel? I guess that would be my question.
Okay. So I've done this, and to me, nothing is harder than teaching a mediocre novel. Nothing is harder, because I am struggling to find something salient to talk about. Whereas Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, I teach that. I could teach that book for a year. I mean, so my challenge in teaching Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is like, what are the most important things, knowing that I'm leaving all kinds of gems on the cutting room floor, all kinds of great stuff. I just can't get to all of these other layers. I'm just going to have to focus on these things. So the challenge in teaching a great book is doing the book justice, giving the kids some salient things to think about and to chew on, knowing that I'm leaving some great stuff unattended to. The challenge for me of teaching, a relevant novel, ironically, because, is that I cannot find anything beyond the most sort of superficial level to get my kids to think. And so when I hear arguments, when we're talking about curriculum questions, and there's a perennial English department fights, as and I have a great department here. Folks are really dedicated and focused on great works and all that kind of thing. But the real hard thing is, those who are in a rush to push relevance, I have found, have a profound lack of faith. And I'm not talking about faith in church and Jesus, and I mean a profound lack of faith in the power of great literature to mean, and the power of great literature to be salient, and the power of great literature to be relevant. To me, nothing is more relevant than the Odyssey.
Right.
And so therefore my job then, so you talked about teacher's role, and I, as a kind of guide, I invoked Virgil. To me, that's the model. It's Virgil and Dante. The model is like, hey, kids, like, take a look at this and this. Like, what do you think of that? Are you sure that's what you think? Okay, cool. But did you notice this? And just, these gentle reframings and redirections to help them ultimately understand. And my frustrations with so-called relevant YA literature is there's just no there there. There's politics, ironically, a lot of politics. It's pretty low res, especially for those of us who've actually read classical political philosophy. It's like, man, this is just dumb. You're right. I mean, and I don't want to be a jerk about this, but it's just dumb. Like, just read the first 5 pages of Aristotle's Politics, please. And you'll see that we don't have the answers, and there's so much depth and complexity to this. It's like, and then you get sort of repeated slogans back at you that they hear on TikTok or CNN or Fox or MSNBC. It's so low res. So to me, the YA lit is pushed by people who don't believe.
Yeah, I no surprise. I agree with you. And as you were speaking, I was then kind of formulating the extension of this is, I don't even know if it's possible to be a good teacher if you're not working with good books.
Oh, right. Oh, amen. I mean, like I never feel, it's funny, maybe there's a paradox. Maybe this is worth exploring in writing, but nothing makes me feel more inadequate as a master, quote unquote, which is real, than Hamlet, or Crime and Punishment. Sorry, that was me. Or Crime and Punishment, or something like that. But nothing makes me feel better and more masterful than teaching those books. And it's not because of me, but I'm feeding off. I mean, it's just like, look at COVID. I'm sure, when we were doing the Zoom thing, all of a sudden I realized I have all of these things that I'm doing physically, and I'm feeding off of physical energies and space and place and all that. And all of a sudden it's flattened to 2D, right? And I'm not getting the feedback, and I can't feel where my kids are. I think there's a comp there that I really required a great book and a great group of students and me kind of doing this 3-way dance that if I don't feel like the book is up to it, man, it makes my job a lot harder. Yeah. And they know, right? Kids know. They're like, yeah, this is weak sauce. This is not real.
Yeah. I think you're right. I see the irony there too, and I know we're going on a little bit. I see the irony too, because a lot of the pushback I get from people when I talk about, the canon is, oh, this is just about yourself. You love these books so much, and you're pushing it on the students. The irony is that it's literally not because of me. Hamlet isn't great because I love it. Hamlet has been established as a great work of literature that we're going to center in this class. If it was about me, I could go any which way.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there's an irony that I want to, now that you say this, I'm going to kind of try to parse out, but it really isn't about me. And I think great teachers know that it is not about them, and kind of about them, but not about them. There's this interesting dynamic that we go back and forth. Like, I know I play a role. Like, I'm Mr. Zeldin. That's why I've been sort of calling you Mr. Ryan this whole time. We embody a kind of play.
Sure.
And a role, and all those kinds of things. And but at a certain point, as I think all good teachers know, when they have to subside, when they have to pull back, or when they need to really kind of lean in and work a little bit more handily, and then kind of reside and go back. And I think that's the art of it. I think that's the craft part of what we try to do. It's that's why I think that as much as advances in AI and robotics will certainly dazzle the mind and dazzle the people, and I'm sure I'll be dazzled along with everybody else, I do know that there's something peculiarly human about, human to human mediated through a book. Something peculiarly magical about that we need not apologize for. So I'm going to stand up for that for as long as I can. So
yeah, I always feel like I'll get asked, "Are you like? Do you have a student-centered classroom, or is
Oh
it
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
teacher-centered classroom?" And I just
Yeah,
say it's a text-centered
yeah,
classroom, and I kind of leave
right,
it at that.
right.
So
No, I think that's exactly right. I think that's the instinct that anything that I do of meaning and importance ultimately must be mediated and filtered through whatever it is we share in common. And right now, what we share in common, is Dante, or is Huck Finn, or whatever we're getting to do. Yeah, it's mediated. Because ultimately they need to move on. And this is such an interesting, because at a certain crucial point in the Purgatorio, Virgil just ghosts. He does an Irish goodbye. He's like, I'm out of here, right? And because Beatrice has to come in and sort of take over, and it's both devastating for Dante, but I think deeply instructive about our teachers are important, but they don't have you to keep you. They have you to send you out, hopefully more full, more real, more realizable. Those kinds of things. So yeah.
yeah, that goes
Well,
back to the Flannery O'Connor statement that I made to
yes,
kind of start us off. Yeah.
no, that's exactly right. I'm gonna have to go find that again. It's a great line.
Yep.
She's such a classic.
Yep.
All right, well, Mr. Ryan, I want to thank you for coming into the Underneath. I really appreciate what you do, and just having a fellow practitioner who sort of is passionate about what we do is a great feeling, I have to say. And so I want to wish you all the best for your upcoming school year. And look, folks, you can find Matt on X. I'll put his link in the show description just below. It's already there by the magic of recording. It's already there. And Matt, have a great one. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
All right.
Have a good
Cheers.
one. Bye.
Oh, haha.